Welcome to the fifth episode in our Canola Watch Winter Webinar series. My name is Jay Wetter. I'm a farm journalist working for the Canola Council of Canada, doing various jobs including Canola Digest editor and hosting webinars. I'm hosting this webinar on behalf of the Canola Council of Canada, Sask Canola, Alberta Canola, and Manitoba Canola growers. And the topic today is challenging environmental conditions, adapting canola nutrient management to maximize potential. Nutrient management, especially when guided by the 4R principles, will improve the return on investment from fertilizer and reduce losses to the air and water. In this webinar, you will learn a few key tips to select the right source of fertilizer and apply it at the right rate, the right time, and in the right place. Those are the 4Rs. We have four presenters: Warren Ward, Karen Dow, Curtis DeGoyer, and Steve Barron. They will each make short presentations, and after all four presentations, we'll have a question and answer session. And we want your questions, so please use the Q&A feature below to pose your questions, and use the chat function, which is beside it or near it, to connect with us and other attendees. Note that attendees can get a CCA credit, and we'll provide the code later in the event. So here we go. I'm going to introduce Warren Ward, our first speaker. Warren is an agronomy specialist for the Canola Council of Canada. He has a plant science degree from the University of Saskatchewan and is a professional agrologist with Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists. Warren is based in the Yorkton area and is the canola nutrients lead for the Canola Council agronomy team. Here's Warren.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, just a minor technical difficulty there. Thank you, Jay. So yeah, I'm going to jump right into it here. And I wanted to start off with the graphic that many people have probably seen in the past. This is our strategic plan on how we're going to reach 52 bushels per acre by the year 2025. So when we first rolled out this plan, we were averaging approximately 34 bushels per acre. And over time here, we've increased that to about 41 bushels per acre through increased management and genetic improvements. But what we've seen recently is that we've kind of plateaued at that 40 to 41 bushels per acre. And we do need to continue striving to reach that 52 bushels per acre and continue to address challenges and opportunities in each of these pillars. Of course, today we're going to highlight fertility management, so that's where we'll be spending the majority of our time. I would just like to point out that we can have the best fertility or nutrient management plan, but if we're not optimizing the rest of our agronomy practices, we're not going to see the benefit from that fertility plan. So it really does all work very closely together. Now, tied in with that strategic plan, we do have sustainability goals as well. So just taking a quick look at them, when we achieve that 52 bushels per acre, we're going to see an 18% reduction in fuel use per bushel of canola that we produce. And really that's coming from yield intensification. Similarly, we'll see a 40% decrease in the amount of land required to produce a ton of canola, again, coming from that yield intensity on intensification on that land. And as we know, as canola is growing, it's sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. And again, once we achieve that yield target, we'll be sequestering an additional 5 million tons of greenhouse gases annually. Probably more importantly, I guess, or last but not least, what we're talking about today is improvements in soil and water health and utilizing the 4R nutrient stewardship practices. And within the canola industry, we have a goal to see 90% of canola acres using 4R management practices. And so really where we're at, we've got a little bit to go to get to that 90% level. But the encouraging thing for me right now is that there are people out there using 4R management practices without having made a conscious decision to do so. So really that tells me that that people are seeing the benefit of these practices and are already implementing them on their farm. And now we just want to see that continued growth of uptake. So our Canola Council agronomy team put our heads together to see what we could come up with to address that yield gap from 40 to 41 bushels per acre and how we're going to achieve 52 bushels per acre. And these are the top 5 priorities that we landed on. And it's very similar actually to the initial plan that we laid out with the pillars to get to 52 bushels per acre. So I'll just take a quick rundown of these priorities. First and foremost, we identified the use of 4R nutrient management practices, and we'll come back to that one in a moment. Also choosing the best seed traits for each field, achieving a uniform 5 to 8 plants per square foot, identifying and managing the top yield robbers, so looking at insect and disease pests, and harvesting all seeds and delivering them at a #1 grade, so optimizing that harvest process. So we're kind of talking, the underlying theme today is challenges and challenging conditions, and they really do play a role in how we implement these agronomic practices, not just for nutrient management, but even looking at something like achieving that uniform 5 to 8 plants per square foot. That really does have a large environmental impact. Looking at 4R management practices, though, which is what we're all here to talk about today, we recognize that not everybody's going to be starting at the same management level when it comes to fertilizer and nutrient management. Some of the lower hanging fruit that we've identified that we'd like to see greater uptake on would be things like increased soil testing, and really that would that once we pair that soil testing with appropriate yield targets for each field or in different areas, we can really start making improved right rate decisions. Similarly, we also would like to see a greater use of varying that rate from field to field, and really not treating every field the same, because we know that there is going to be differences there. And so some people are already there. So maybe the next step would be looking at variable rate and zone management within fields to optimize production that way. So there's a number of things there, and I'm not going to get too far into 4R because our next presentation is going to focus on that a little bit. But I did want to set the stage as to where we are today and leading into the planting season of 2022. And so really, I could have thrown that great big red map up talking about drought conditions from last year, but I think everybody's probably tired of seeing that. But it is one of the main underlying factors of where we are today. It was dry last year. There was nutrient carryover that wasn't utilized by the crop. So that really enhanced the need for things like soil testing last fall. And then in a lot of areas, we did see some moisture late in the season that caused a lot of regrowth. So now we've got nutrient tied up in some of that regrowth material. Over the winter, we've had varying rates of snowfall across the prairies. So there's definitely going to be some situations there where maybe there's excess runoff and maybe some pooling of water in some of the low spots, and some areas are still remaining quite dry. So that's kind of some of the challenges that we'll be facing with nutrient management this year that's going to impact the decisions that we make. If we look at things like prices, inputs, and commodities, again, I don't have any charts or graphs to share with you on that, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that those trends are trending upwards. So really, there's some challenges there, but there's also opportunity, and we want to make sure we're able to capitalize on that, on those commodity prices, but realizing that, input prices and some of the logistics around some of the inputs are going to be a bit of a challenge. Also, there's the consumer awareness, emissions targets, that whole environmental piece, and that's one that's not going away. So we need to get in front of that as agronomists and producers, and really showcase the things that we are doing to improve our management practices and show that to the world as well. So really, that's a good tie-in for 4R, because it really does take a lot of these challenges, and it's a flexible program that allows us to optimize our production, especially with regards to nutrient management. And I'm going to leave it at that. I look forward to your questions, and hopefully we can have a good discussion here following the presentations. So thank you very much.
Good. Thanks, Warren. All right, next is Karen Dow. Karen spent 22 years with BASF in various roles and areas, and 7 years with Blair's family of companies as sales director. In November 2020, Karen joined Federated Co-op as the manager of agronomic market development. Karen is a forensic agrologist and an active member of the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists. Here's Karen.
Well, thank you very much, Jay. I'm really happy to be here today. My presentation is going to focus on why 4R is important. And we have a platform in FCL called Grown with Purpose. So you'll see reference to that, but that's just our 4R platform that we use with farmers. I want to go over why sustainability is important to Western Canadian farmers. The one thing that I want to emphasize is most farmers are using sustainability practices on their farm. We just don't have the data to prove it. So many of the platforms that companies like FCL, JRI, Nutrien, Independence, there is 4R agronomists that will go over an assessment with you and answer all the questions. And then we have the data that we can use in discussions with government, because they are implementing sustainability objectives and goals. And I think one of the things I really want to emphasize to you is that if we provide the data, we have a basis for discussions with the government on how the 4R nutrient stewardship practices do, look after the sustainability issues in terms of reductions of emissions of nitrous oxide, as well as sequestering carbon. When you define sustainability, there's normally 3 pillars that we look at. First of all is the economic profitability. We don't implement practices on farms unless they make economic sense. And the environmental stewardship part, of course, I don't think there's any farmer that is going around and not using environmental stewardship practices. But the 4R assessment really goes through all those practices that you are using. We have a social responsibility. Customers, consumers are wanting to know more about what farmers do. And there isn't many people that are directly from a farm anymore. And I think consumers need to know about the sustainability in agriculture. And in fact, that farmers do have a very long-term approach on sustainability. We talk about economic profitability. How you manage your farm is all to do with economics. But I think over the last 20 years, research has repeatedly demonstrated that sustainable agriculture is much more profitable than conventional agriculture. A farm that is using a practice like zero-till, when you start looking at 4Rs, really, it does really lend itself into sustainability, because not only are we conserving moisture with zero tillage, but we're also sequestering more carbon and making our soils healthier, as well as reducing erosion. I think the one other thing I want to emphasize, agronomists in the field are 4R certified and trained. That's a question you can ask agronomists that you're working with. One of the real key things is we go through training to be certified and talk about the practices that can help you be more sustainable. And some of the practices may make sense on your farm. Again, when we talked about in 1990, I was just out of college, and I remember thinking, there is no way all farmers will switch to zero-till. Well, that was proved wrong, because it made sense, economic sense on a farm, and it does make sustainable sense on a farm. So I think when you look at zero-till, soil testing, which is huge, because you need to know what type of fertilizer you need, when you're going to apply it, and soil tests will give you recommendations, and your 4R certified agronomist can then decide what type of fertilizer, when you put it on, maybe growing new crops or your crop rotation can be changed. So being a responsible partner, there's lots of the industry that is working together. If you look at 4R designated acres, Fertilizer Canada is looking to increase that to 15 million by 2025, and that's a huge goal. And we're getting there. I think the number that I looked at yesterday was 6 million acres. And it's not that there's way more acres that could be 4R certified if we had the data. And so Canola Council, 90% of the canola acres, they would like to be reported in the 4R by 2025. I think the number there was 55% of the acres are being reported today. So I think we can all do a lot better. I'm from Saskatchewan, and the government of Saskatchewan is talking about having 25% of the total cropland acres designated as 4R by 2025. And Saskatchewan has a lot of acres. And I think in order to do this, we need to encourage farmers to just report the acres. So if we look at environmental stewardship, some of your 4R agronomists are going to go over the buffer areas around waters, you know, looking at soil cover. We look at a whole host of things. And what I really want to hit home to you guys is that the farming practices we use today are very sustainable. And I think it's just a matter of reporting what we're doing and having the discussion with the agronomist that will help you. Social responsibility, I think that, you know, our government is pushing forward to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, as well as looking at the carbon sequestration in agriculture. So I think data is what's going to carry us forward here. And I just want to talk a little bit again about the 4R nutrient stewardship practices. When you look at it, it's about using the right source of fertilizer and using soil tests to decide what rate you're putting on, and doing it at the right time. I think Western Canadian agriculture, we've looked at fertilizer as being a one-pass operation with seeding. And I think we need to look at how we feed the plant and encourage the plant to grow at the right times, and looking at timing of fertilizer, maybe in split applications, could be something that would be an economic benefit to the farm as well. I think that as farmers of agriculture, it's really important, you know, to document your practices. And any of the acres that are recorded under 4R are done with anonymity. So it's not like anybody seeing the farmers' names. It's a reporting of the acres on the crops that we have. And I believe that this is the right way to document what we're doing, and that gives us visibility of showing not only consumers, but government on how we are managing our soils, our fertilizer, and how we grow crops. So that is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Anyway, Curtis DeGoyer. Curtis is agronomy team lead at Borgo Industries, based in St. Bruce, Saskatchewan. He's a professional agrologist, certified crop advisor, and a 4R nutrient management specialist. He also organizes large-scale replicated fertilizer placement trials at the Borgo farm. Curtis will share some of his key results. Here's Curtis.
Right on, you guys can all hear me there and everything's good?
Yep, sounds good, Curtis.
Awesome, thank you, Jay. Yeah, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the time here. And yeah, I think, listening to the last two presentations, I'm going to change it up the pace a little bit here. I'm going to dive into some of our trials and, some of these things we talk about, the right place, right timings, and how does it affect your crop and on your farm. So like Jay mentioned, we have a farm here, about 2,300 acres, and every year we take a quarter into canola. We have another quarter in wheat. But obviously for this one, we'll concentrate on the canola side of things. What we're doing on these trials when we're testing these different practices and these different placements, we're using a larger scale equipment, I would say, compared to a traditional small plots. We're using 30-foot drills, so they're 30 feet by 400 feet long, and replicating our trials. And what this allows us to do is test the equipment that you would see on your farm, test the equipment that we're currently selling. In this case, we've got a triple shoot drill here on 12-inch spacing, and then we also have a 10-inch drill, and we have an air planter on it. So it gives us a lot of ability to test these different placements and practices. So the one thing I get asked quite a bit, what is fertilizer burn? What does it look like? And I think that this really ties into, some of the things on the right placement. And I actually listened to a presentation there yesterday from Kim Stonehouse, and these are some images from Peter Malecki from it. In wheat, it's kind of, it seems like it's a little easier to see versus in canola, but a lot of times you see these blank spots, and when you dig it up, you can kind of see the wheat does funky stuff. Canola wise, it's a little bit trickier. It doesn't seem to want to, dig it up and show quite as nice. What it really shows up as is just a blank placements and lower plant stands. So what we wanted to do here then was kind of look at canola is a very flexible, very elastic plant in general. So we actually set up the seed rate trial where we tried different seeding rates. And so we had 10 seeds, 5 seeds, and 2.5 seeds. And I'm sure many of you have seen on your farms, if there's an issue or frost or something happened, or just seeding a little lower, what you'll end up with these plants kind of like this on the right-hand side. In this case, I was only seeding 2.5 seeds, and I was getting about 2 plants. Then we move up to the 10 seeds, and we're getting about 6 plants. And you can just see how the crop and the plant themselves change. So when it came to yields, though, when canola, what it can do is has the ability to fill out, to get yield even with lower plant stands. So on the left-hand side, you have our 2.5 seeds. We're down to about 2 plants here. And as we went up 5 seeds, 10 seeds, our yield actually started to decrease. This is from 2021. We're getting about half the yields that we've had in the previous years. But what was interesting too is as we had more plants, we actually had a higher competition. I kind of took note of these unproductive plants, and they're these small, tiny ones, about the size of the inside of a pen. And as we had more plants, we actually had less productive plants. Interesting enough, too, as we seeded less, we actually had higher emergence. I think that this is an interesting concept as we move forward, but this really ties into our nitrogen placement and how it affects the crop. Now we can look at how our fertilizer placement compares to how we just had a lower seeding rate. So if we have a lower plant stand due to fertilizer placement, we can see how it compares to that other trial. So in this case, we'll have nitrogen close. It's about 1.5 inches away. From the seed, we put it down in the ground. We put all our fertilizer in a sideband configuration. And then we had mid-row bander applicators on our drill, and we can just put them down. But what this really allows us to do is use the exact same equipment, exact same fertility rates, literally side by side, and just see what it does to the crop. And again, it really pertains to the right placement. And so again, we just move that nitrogen over, nothing else changes. And what we've kind of found throughout the years here, we've been doing it since 2016 up here in St. Bruce, Saskatchewan. So it's a gray wooded soil type. Every year we see as we move this nitrogen away, we get this little bump in establishment. And that really does go to show those practices that you are making on the farm can affect the crop itself. And so over all these 5 years, and I understand in one area, but over 5 years, different weather patterns coming through here. We had about 21% higher emergence. The yields wise are actually very similar, and this is just a real testament to how canola can compensate. But 53-54 bushels within a bushel, but that plant stand all of a sudden can make some big effects on your crop and your management decisions. Nitrogen mid-row, this is from 2020. Again, we're putting down 10 seeds. We move that N away, we're getting 8.6 plants versus we have that N close, we're about 4.9 plants. And again, seeded the same day, everything's the same, but you can just see how it affects the crop. This one's much more further ahead, doesn't have to wait for those later branches to come out. This one, it's just delayed. It has to, the crop has to branch out, and this really comes down to the individual plants. And you can see on the left side here, nitrogen in the mid-row. Well, it's kind of a smaller plant, looks like, if you were just to pull them up. And that's a very fair comment versus nitrogen in the sideband, and it looks like it's branching off. And it is, it has less plants, more room to fill out. So this can really affect your maturities out there. So again, placement, how it affects the yield, the plant stands, crop inputs, maturity, fertilizer placement when it comes to fertilizer burn, to come back to that. It really shows up, in the plant stands. And then at the individual level, it almost looks like it's a seed rate trial again, right? This big branch, well, this is done all with the exact same fertility placement, but yet we have, we're affecting how each individual plant looks and how it fills out just based on our fertility placement, and then fertility placement affects the plant stand. So some other things we've been playing with when it comes down to the 4 R's. If you do have a sideband configuration and you like that style and it works well for you, but some of the things that we're trying is different sources. So this is our typical. This is using urea, 140 pounds. Everything's in the sideband, and then we can start to play around with some ESN. And what we found was when we put 30% ESN as our nitrogen source, we saw our plant stands go up. Our yield dropped a little bit, and that was, I think, more of a function of this year. We had some really high temperatures, some heat blasting potential. And if it seemed like the higher the plant stand, the more it was subject to the heat a little bit earlier on in July. And if it missed the big heat wave that came through, we had a little bit higher yields. And so when it came to broadcasting, we put Super U down and broadcast in front, and then came and seeded with that dual knife opener. Moved all the N away, our plant stands went up, but our yield dropped a little bit more here. Again, I'm not putting too much weight on this. This was a very unique year. And I think it really had a lot to do with that flowering timing being earlier and more heat. And we found the same thing when we just moved that N away, just as a comparison here. So N away, higher plant stands. One last thing I'm just going to touch on quick. Our most common kind of configuration, I would say, from Borgo is this placement with seed and seed and a little starter fertilizer, and then you have your mid-row banders and then nitrogen in the mid-row. We've done a lot of work with actually taking some of that seed placed fertilizer and moving some of it into the mid-row. And this really speaks to the drier conditions that Warren kind of started off with there going into this spring. There is an option here where we can actually split some fertility between the seed and the mid-row. And then it comes down to placement there too. So this is just kind of showing what we found was, if you just look at even these left 2 bars, 0 FOS, and we had 55 pounds of actual P205 in the mid-row. We always see this little bump. in yield, and that was over a 3-year period. And so what we found was you don't get that early access to phosphorus, but if you do the split application with it, there's been some real success. So that's kind of some of the things that we're playing with here when it comes to placement. If you want to find out more, you can just go on our website under the Agronomy tab, or you can contact myself. You can find me on Twitter. But no, I look forward to any questions or comments here coming up at the end of this webinar. So thank you very much, Jay.
Thanks, Curtis. Okay, I'm going to try this mic one more time. It's usually very reliable, so hopefully it doesn't fail me this time. But so far, so good. All right, now for Steve Barron. Steve is with Double Diamond Farm Supply in South Central Manitoba, near where I grew up, actually. He's been involved with Fertilizer Canada, providing 4R fertilizer retail training in the Manitoba region since 2016. Steve will share some cropping solutions that improve economic and environmental situations for Canadian farmers. Here's Steve.
As I was saying, welcome everybody. I hope this webinar finds everybody healthy, happy, looking forward to our 2022 growing season. And it's a daunting task to talk about challenging environmental conditions in any sense. As you can see, always need to be an optimist in any industry you're in. And if you're going to play soccer in this park, you need to be an optimist. Realistically, I'm using a holistical approach to address this complex topic, and I refer to it the 4 shins: motion, evaluation, consideration, and communication. So emotion. Well, realistically, adapting to change is not easy for anyone. And when you're in challenging environmental times, change is just something we deal with every day with Mother Nature. Just as some of the previous speakers have touched on, equipment is huge. Currently on your farm, it's always nice to traditionally do what you've always done, but sometimes you got to look at some change with potential new farm equipment or custom service options for placement and nutrition and that style of thing, and that can translate into traditional versus new nutrition sources, which could look like nitrification inhibitors or controlled release products or urease inhibitors and that. Purchasing nutrition inputs. Well, there is an emotion that in today's day and age is tough, because we all understand the appreciation of what nutrition looks like today with synthetic fertilizers. So having a real reflective approach on what's going to be best for the production on my farm, in turn, that should be better for the environment. And just needs to be reflected upon. Next slide, evaluation. When it comes to evaluation, analyzing past canola performance concerning the nutrition management on your farm is huge. And with that, definitely the equipment side is something that need to reflect on. Obviously, the last few years we've been dealing with drought conditions within Western Canada, but some years that could be excessive moisture. And this all reflects on the environmental challenges of either way that would look. Baselining your 2022 canola nutrition performance for future reference, I think, is huge. And a lot of that is understanding newer canola genetics. I believe our seed manufacturers have come to the market with genetics that's exponentially been getting better year in, year out. And we need to baseline what's working for us today with nutrition to understand where we can get to better performance in the future. Next slide, please, Cass. Consideration. Now, I won't delve a lot into the 4R nutrient management consideration side of things as far as the technical portion of it, but it is huge. Reflecting on your right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right places is going to take you to the next level with your production. And anytime you can breed efficiencies through nutrition management that way, environmental stewardship will follow suit. Touching a little bit on the right source, I would suggest it's not always just synthetic fertilizers, the granulars and liquids and NH3 products, manure, compost, or looking at, say, enhanced efficiency fertilizers with nitrification, urease inhibitors, controlled release, biologicals. That style of thing needs to be entertained when it comes to the right rate. While we touched on that about understanding your canola's physiological needs of nutrition as it's growing, trying to get a hold of those needs. Digital virtual tools to understand soil tests and those things. That helps with understanding rates year in, year out, and how you can evolve to be better. Right time, well, spring versus fall, in-season applications, and the right place, well, taking into consideration your soil texture through some of the soil testing that you've done to understand your nutrient bank, using that to understand how placement could be done in a better fashion. Defining nutrient management. Now, if we go to our next slide, please. That consideration is huge. Now, I think to preface this slide, I think the practice of precision nutrition management delivers value most of the time. But now when you run into environmental challenges, it seems to get magnified and amplified in environmentally challenging times or economically challenged times. But I feel as if utilizing precision nutrition management, however that might look, is normally always going to deliver a better profit at the farm gate, which in turn should always be better for the environment. Precision nutrient management on defining field zones, utilizing historical field data with yield or NDVI, LIDAR, utilizing satellites or drones, elevation topography, salinity maps, personal historical observations. All of these are huge to define these zones and understand how placement of the fertilizer can be done most efficiently. If you just look at the bottom of the slide here, we have an NDVI imagery from July 17th on a canola crop of 2021. To the left, you have a NDVI imagery of the same field on July 17th of 2020 in an oat crop. Now, just by looking at that NDVI imagery, you can tell that there's defined zones in that field through the soil, through different crops. Next slide, please, Cass. And then finally, communication. And I think if we just roll into the last slide, please, Cass. Communication is huge in today's day and age when it comes to environmental conditions. And we're talking today about canola nutrient management. Realistically, this is with any cropping situation. Supply. Communication is huge. If you're going to communicate with your retailer, your manufacturer, your neighbor, your supplier as a whole, wherever you're going to find that nutrition, having those discussions ahead of time will pay dividends. Rear view mirror practices, we've touched on this, and all of our speakers today have touched on this. Realistically, just looking what you've done in the past, just having a calm approach and understanding this worked, this didn't work, maybe we should be looking at some different equipment, that style of thing. R&D products. We have a lot of different information at our fingertips through government organizations, commodity groups, products, practices. Doing your own research, doing your own farm research, that needs to be communicated and understood and just taken into consideration. New technology, well, new technology, that's such a vast concept. That could be seed technology, enhanced efficiency fertilizers, equipment, but realistically just communicating with your peers, communicating with your equipment dealers, your retailers, anybody, just to get a larger picture view of options that you might have. And finally, the economics, cash flow, financing, as we discussed, communicating that ahead of time so you're prepared for nutrition management moving into 22 would be very important, and to put yourself and your operation in a peace of mind. Thank you, folks, and I apologize for the technical.
Good, thanks, Steve. All right, let's go 9 minutes of Q&A, and then each of you will have 30 seconds to sign off, and then we'll wrap up. Cass, you could pop up that QR code for the CCA credits now, and then we'll do it again later. Steve, I'm going to start with you, a question for you. And again, if anybody has questions, you can add it to the Q&A at the bottom. Just click that link and enter your question, or click that tab, pardon me, and enter your question. Steve, you mentioned baselining your 2022 canola nutrition performance. Have you got a 1 minute quick Coles Notes version on how to baseline effectively? What notes to take, that kind of thing?
I suggest soil testing right at the beginning and understanding what you have in your soil, what's in the soil bank for nutrition, and then just utilize there's a lot of different digital platforms out there that you can use to harness your historical data of what you've done along the way. And then follow up with your harvest field data. And then just really reflect on it shortly after the harvest to understand how many pounds of N it took to create a bushel of product. And then you'll know moving into the next year of how to approach the opportunity on that acre with that crop.
Right on. Thanks, Steve. I popped in a couple of links to the canola encyclopedia, but if the three of you have links to some of the 4R services that your companies offer, you could plop that in there. I know, Curtis, you mentioned the Borgo website and where your trials are, but if you have a direct link, toss that in. But I have a question for you, so you'll have to wait till you're done answering. So, I mean, the 4R, one of the 4Rs is right place. And so your graphics, which are really good, showed the mid-row band, and then you had the side band, and then you had right in the seed row. I just wondered if you noticed any differences in canola performance with this right in the seed row versus the side band. You know, they could both qualify as seed place, perhaps, in your mind. Do you have results and tips with regard to that placement closer to the seed?
Right, and you're talking specifically, Jay, phosphorus or?
Yeah,
or
well, we try to get people to limit seed place fertilizer to phosphorus only, especially in the seed row. That side band looked awfully close, even in your diagram when you compare it to the mid-row band. So I'm wondering if you also would suggest keeping more fertilizer out of that, even that 1 inch or 1.5 inches away band as well.
It's a little canola plant doesn't need a whole lot of nutrients earlier on. You know, you get a little bit there, just for enough for it to kind of get up and get going. And then the roots are actually quite fast growing on a specifically a canola plant, plants in general, but a canola plant specifically. And so the major uptake actually occurs more at the elongation stage. So as long as you're not limited, if you haven't limited your crop uptake earlier on, just gets what it needs to get up and get going, then you don't need a whole lot, to be honest. And so the question between seed row and sideband, it's actually it becomes a function of nitrogen placement too. And what I mean by that is if there's a lot of nitrogen around in the sideband with all the phosphorus, it doesn't get taken up quite as early. And so, you know, pay attention to that can also help understand why that plant might be sluggish, even though you have phos close. So.
Right on. Thanks, Curtis. Now you can put your link in. All right, Karen, I've got a question for you. And this has to do with split applications, which you mentioned very briefly, but didn't really get a chance to expand on given the short time frame. So I'm wondering whether you have tips, like, again, same with Steve, like the 1 minute Coles Notes version of the tips on you know, whether you think it's a good practice, and a couple little 4R tips on how to make it effective.
So again, I think that especially coming into a year like we have, that's we're lacking subsoil moisture. Lots of growers are thinking about limiting what they put in the seed row or side banded with the seed. And, you know, really it's about making sure that you've got nitrogen available at the correct growing stages. So, you know, we've talked to a lot of farmers this year about maybe a reduction, and we're not talking huge reductions depending on your soil moisture conditions, but limiting your seeding fertilizer, and then looking at liquid applications, whether it's through dribble banding or a matter like that, and making the nitrogen available at a later time, and actually using a nitrogen stabilizer when you do put the liquid on, so that it has a chance to feed the crop through the rest of the year. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I would encourage people, again, to get that soil test, so our certified agronomists can make, you know, some decisions based on that soil test of what the needs of the crop would be, and look at what your yield target is on the canola.
So I have one last question, but I just wondered if Steve, you're in Manitoba, Curtis, you're up in the black soil zone. Any thoughts on the appropriateness of a split application in your regions? Steve, do you want to go first?
Okay. Yeah, I think we're very diverse here in our soil type in Manitoba. You know, you get into Red River Valley with heavy clay soils. You know, they do a lot of front loading of nutrition, and that soil has a better capacity of hanging on to it without maybe losses to a certain extent. Then you get into some coarser soils in the pockets and regions. I would suggest, yeah, I would think that just utilizing the right train of thought when it comes to what the spring looks like and your soil type, just that every year could be a little different for us. It's a kind of a big question to ask when you talk about in-season applications, or you know what, at the end of the day, maybe just understanding what it looks like down the road on those coarser soils and feeding it, because the opportunities there would be something you'd want to take into consideration.
Yeah, I think the idea of the split application makes total sense, right? You feed the crop when it needs it as you go. Up north, we actually, you know, a lot of times it's fall applications with anhydrous, so a lot of the N goes down earlier that way. You know what? To be honest with you, a lot of times the problem with the split application here, we've got a lot of acres, we got to cover a lot of ground. People get sick of sitting in their sprayer or the broadcast, and you know, they want to go out and go to the lake, to be honest with you, during the summer and enjoy some of that. So you know, those types of things kind of come into play, whether or not that's right or not. The logistics becomes almost like a limiting factor. But then again, we also have some research too. I know out of Indian Head, where we've done a lot of these split application tests, and sometimes it works, sometimes they don't. And so if it's a 50-50, you know, producers are choosing to, I guess, kind of front load a little bit more and get it done in one pass. So.
Okay, good. Thanks, guys. All right, Warren, there's a question there from Ashley in the Q&A. It's about nitrous oxide emitters. And that is something that I think we would need a bit more research on. But do you want to take a stab at that one, or should we answer Ashley afterwards?
Yeah, we can maybe touch on it here.
Okay, go for it.
I guess the best I could say is, so yeah, there's that 30% emissions reduction target that has been announced federally, and that's basically the basis of the question. And so how do we get there, I think is really the heart of the question, and is it important for us to get there? So first of all, you know, I think it's important to note that I think it's approximately 80% of nitrous oxide emissions do come from agricultural applications of fertilizers. So yeah, there is, I guess, a need to address those emissions. And, you know, are we able to achieve 30% emissions reductions? You know, if we look at some of the gains that can be made through more widely adopting for our practices, I think there is some opportunity there for us to achieve those targets. whether it's through, looking at banding versus broadcast, timing of applications, using enhanced efficiency products is also another big one there. And then there was another part to that question about how we stack up globally, and I don't really have that offhand, but I guess if we just want to keep looking at it from our industry perspective, there are things we can do to improve it, and not only are we going to improve that environmentally, but a lot of those improvements are going to help us out agronomically as well. So that's it's in a way there are some win-win situations there, and not everything some things come at a cost, some things are going to come at a benefit, and it just reminds me of for our adoption, and one of the biggest barriers to it in survey data is that people are concerned that adopting 4R is going to be economically unfeasible, or it's going to cost them too much to implement 4Rs. Whereas the people who are actually practicing 4R practices, one of the benefits they're seeing is increased economic production. So, I think it's one of those things, once you get into it and really start looking at it, there are some opportunities there, and we don't need to look at it as a negative. I think some of these targets or some of these improvements that we're working towards.
I mean, actually, I don't have any more to add to that, except to say that if we don't have good data, like Warren said, on emissions around the world, but I think if we could find that and learned, areas that have lower emissions, why, and could we apply that here, areas with higher emissions, why, and I think we could learn a lot by studying how it's different around the world. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, and I want everybody to give me their wrap up session. My other one question was that if you squeeze it in if you can. This could be quick, but 4R is a fairly broad category of practices. I'm wondering if each of you, as part of your closing, could tell me one 4R practice that you think is underutilized, like the proverbial low-hanging fruit that you wish more people would do. So we're going to go in the order of the presentation. So Warren, we'll go back to you. I'm putting you on the spot here. So one 4R practice that you'd like to see done more, and then your last word. We'll combine those two.
Sure. So I'll combine them here as I go. So for me, 4R management is it's a flexible management plan that gets you the most out of your fertilizer applications. And one of the ways of, in my mind, the very first step of that is soil testing. We need to know what we're working with. So I got the easiest of the low-hanging fruit here by going first, I think. But I would like to see an increase in soil testing, and that's really just going to drive the rest of the management practices. And part of that is just overall the planning process that goes into 4R. So I would encourage people to seek out, whether it's through their retail or the agronomist they're working with, to actually start looking at 4Rs, putting that plan in place. And I think if you're not already doing it, you'll be surprised at how flexible and convenient, and it will help in situations like this year where we do have some challenges.
And is that your closing statement too? Perfect.
Sure is.
Right on. Thanks, Warren. Okay, Karen.
I would have to, with soil testing gone, I would say my next suggestion would be, I think we can achieve using our fertilizer better with the digital agronomy platforms that are out there. We can use the same amount of fertilizer, or actually reduce it, by just not fertilizing the areas that are non-productive much more readily, and actually it will add to our bottom line because we're not putting as much fertilizer on the field. So I think it's about knowing where the fertilizer is required to grow a crop. So I would just like to, in my wrap up, say data is so important, and recording your acres is critical to us, so we can prove what Western Canadian farmers are doing to be more sustainable.
Okay, good. Thanks, Karen. Curtis, and then Steve. Curtis.
Sure. I think, kind of the wrap up thing here is that it was touched on already. The concept of 4R principles isn't something massive that has to be, a big document that you have to prepare. It's these little things that occur on the farm, these little enhancements that you can do, and in whatever way it pertains to your particular operation. So, I think that's kind of my big thing. And as far as the R that I like the most, well, I guess placement is kind of the thing there. And I think that kind of can get overlooked in both safety, but also in productivity as far as decreasing your inputs. And yeah, I guess I just like the golden rule of specifically nitrogen placement is get it in the ground. So I'll maybe leave that there. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks, Curtis. Steve, last word.
I think realistically, if I was gonna pick on the 4 nutrient stewardship and the practice and the consideration of it all, the right source, realistically, just have a conversation, do your own homework, research it yourself, nitrification inhibitors, enhanced controlled release products, urease inhibitors, keeping in mind pound for pound, they're not all the same, but just considering them, they are in a classification of enhanced efficiency fertilizers. And as Karen had mentioned, when you're defining zones and utilizing some of these products correctly, you can probably cut back in certain situations. And that's an environmentally sound practice with less nitrous oxide emissions, and in turn should increase your productivity, which would help your bottom line.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Cass could put up the CCA code just as I wrap up here. This webinar was recorded and will be reposted at the Canola Council of Canada YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com/Canola Council. I will also make it into a Canola Watch podcast. So thank you for joining us today. Please mark your calendars for the final webinar in the Canola Watch series, which is on April 13th. The topic is Make Every Plant Count, Practical Tips to Maximize Your Stand. And details, including registration, can be found at your Provincial Canola Association website or at canolacouncil.org. If you go to the Canola Council site, you can find the events section under the About Us tab, and that's where you'll find the info. Thanks again to today's presenters, Karen Dow, Curtis DeGoyer, Steve Barron, and my colleague Warren Ward. Thanks to Cass Carty for her behind the scenes work, a little more work than usual today. And thanks to the host organizations, Canola Council of Canada, Manitoba Canola Growers, SAS Canola, and Alberta Canola. I'm Jay Wetter. See you next time.